Hello. Hello and welcome to our second event from the Alignist at the Green Space, Ticket to Rwanda. We're so glad to have you all here tonight. We have a really incredible slate of advocates, experts, and performers for you this evening. Each of them has their own deep connection to Rwanda. We'll bring them all up in a moment, but first, I thought we'd warm up this stage a little bit with some storytelling from comedian Sonia Denis. She's a talented comedian of Rwandan descent who has performed all over the country. She's worked on shows like High Maintenance from HBO and BoJack Horseman on Netflix. So let's give a warm welcome to Sonia Denis.
Hello. You guys, clap it up for the people that created this event. This is so nice, you know? I feel a little weird being here because everyone you're gonna see is like from the UN, they run a nonprofit, and I'm like, my parents didn't laugh enough at my jokes. So, yeah, okay, that was the right response. I moved here in the late 80s when I was like 4 or 5 from Rwanda with my parents. My dad, he's Haitian, and he met my mom when he was in Rwanda, and then we moved here. And it was weird for a while because I spent a lot of time trying to like figure out how I could fit in and get other kids to like me. They knew I was different. I would spend like time like analyzing everything, and I remember it's the 90s, so like streaming wasn't a thing back then. It was more about like we would listen to radio a lot, so I was like, radio, got it. So I went home and I listened to a ton of radio, and the next day I came back and I was like, you guys, Terry Gross says the Mujahideen is sponsored by the US government. And they were like, no, what are you talking about? Like, oh, music, got it. So, music, that's what you guys are doing? Yep, not NPR, you know, so I feel like it's a full circle moment, you know. It's not like NPR ruined my childhood, but did it, you know. My dad used to drive a yellow station wagon, and every morning he'd drive me to school. And anytime I hear the morning edition theme, I have a reaction, you know. But then fast forward a couple of years ago, I was in a theater and I saw Ira Glass and I teared up. So I don't know how to feel, you know. I just want you to know I'm one of you, but not willingly. My parents did it. No, I mentioned Rwanda. I spent a lot of time too, like, I'm proud of who I am now, but it took a while, you know, because kids didn't like us. They were like, I think a lot of American media portrays Africa in a really terrible light, so they didn't want to be us. And so we would get names, and so I decided that the way I could fit in was to be as American as possible. And so anytime someone would ask me where I was born, I would pick the most American place, like Disneyland, you know, or Queens, Big Apple, go Mets! I didn't know what I was saying. But it felt right. Or like one time I tried to change my name to Keisha, and my mom blew it up. She answered the phone, someone was like, can I speak to Keisha? She's like, Keisha, who is this Keisha? So, say it, you know. It's also, in trying to fit in, like my mom and I went through like this period of like distance because she was also going through her thing. Like her degree was in accounting when she moved here, and she was an accountant, but when she got here, that degree was worthless. So she went to night school and became a nurse, and it was a lot. Like when I became a comedian, she was really unhappy. It was like, we moved here so you could do this. And she didn't talk to me for a month, but then at some point, she finally was like, okay, you're not gonna quit this, so let me see a video. And I showed her a video of my stand-up, and she was watching it, and 2 minutes in, she was like, do you do this a lot? I was like, oh my God, you know, it's so painful. But as an adult too, it was weird, like growing up, like people only have one point of reference for Rwanda when I was younger. Like people would always be like, wait a minute, did you say Rwanda? Like Hotel Rwanda, I love that movie. Have you seen it? Have you been to Rwanda? You know, it's like I said I am, but okay. Cause it's like I would never meet someone who's Jewish and be like, shut up. Did you say you're Jewish? Schindler's List. Have you seen it? You know, it's inappropriate. Okay. It's a tight room, tight room. We're gonna be discussing the genocide later. I'm just trying to warm you guys up for that part. But my mom hates that joke, and she's right. One of the stories my mom told me too is like when we moved, when she was in school getting her degree in nursing, I remember she went to this teacher and she was like, she needed help. So she asked the teacher, and the teacher was like, well, let's open a textbook. And they read like, she was like, read this line and tell me what it means. And my mom read the line and she told her what she thought it meant. And she told her to do it again, 2 or 3 times, read the line, tell me what it means. And at the end of that, she was like, we don't even understand English, so how are you gonna pass this class? And my mom was like gutted, you know, because she'd been vulnerable with this woman telling her that. And she was like, I went to the bathroom, I cried, I wiped my face. And then I went to another teacher, and she talked to that teacher, and that teacher helped her, and she kept working. And I remember I used to see her at the table with just stacks and stacks of books with things like pictures of STDs that we shouldn't have been looking at, but she was a nurse. And she would just try. She worked so hard, and she was like, when I finally got that degree, I walked across the stage, and I looked at that woman, and I was like, boop. No, she didn't give her a finger. What she did? No, my good Christian mom, she's a good Catholic. She won't watch this. But she like looked at that woman in the eye, and anytime something happens to me, I think of that moment with her, you know? Like, how can I ever in my life think I can't get over something when this woman came pregnant with my twin siblings, didn't know anybody except my dad. She had no family here. Both her and I had to learn English. And all I ever saw was just her like crushing me with her fear and everything. But now I look back and it's like it was so hard for her. But that being said, she raised me in the West. And weekly, I call her now and I'm like, Mom, I woke up sad and I don't know why. How dare I, you know, gross. She's been through too much already. But she's always like, she's very, she's a good Catholic, so she's always like, oh no, have you prayed? I'm always like, I'm agnostic, so maybe. She doesn't like that joke either. We're still at odds. But I went, I always wondered like what the thing would be that my mom would like be like impressed by to finally get her to be like, maybe this is a real profession. I always thought like Obama and Oprah and like Chris Rock would have to be on stage like, she's got it, before she was like, maybe. But I did a Zillow commercial. And her friend saw it, and then at the end I always go, bye. She was like, bye. So that was, a commercial did it, you know. And here I was thinking, I had a computer science degree. It was a failure for everybody. But I am in therapy, in case you were wondering. You're like, she seems sad. Maybe, probably. But I went to a psychiatrist, and he was like, they asked you a series of questions to try to assess the situation. So one of the first questions he asked me, he was like, are you in a relationship? And I was like, yeah. He was like, boyfriend? I was like, yeah. He was like, do you love him? And I was like, I don't know. What did he say? I want to say first. He didn't laugh. I was like, okay. He's like, do you do drugs? And I was like, no. No. And then towards the end, he was like, he got really serious. And he was like, have you ever had any suicidal thoughts? I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, like, honestly, that's a big part of why I'm here, you know? But it feels insane to feel like that when you're fighting this, like, trauma in your head when you have a parent that's experienced real trauma. I can't tell you the number of people my mom's lost, the number of people she's lost even after the genocide. Like, she's endured so much, and my dad, too. And for me to come here and be like, I'm sad, it just felt so wrong. And it just makes actually going through something with that incredibly difficult. And the psychiatrist looked at me and he looked at his notepad and he's like, not if you're determined. What? He said that. I paid for that advice. But, you know, now I really want to do it, you guys. Just so I can write a suicide note, like, thanks, Dr. Keating. No, okay. I didn't think that would work here either, but I had to try. Thank you so much, you guys. I've been Sonia Denny.
All right. Thank you, Sonia. Sonia. Thank you, Sonia, for sharing a little bit about your own experiences. It's good to have a little bit of levity because we're going to be diving into some pretty difficult issues tonight. And before we do that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the Alignist, the concept, how it all works. So the Alignist is a way to unpack big real-world issues, like, for example, the Rwandan genocide, through these boxes that are sent out quarterly, so once every 3 months. And it's sort of meant to be a multi-sensory tour of the world, one country at a time. So the latest one obviously featured Rwanda, and this event is a way to bring that to life, to the stage. And so as you're reading along, each box features a novel. It's all set around a novel. And this month's novel, or this quarter's novel, was the Our Lady of the Nile by Scholastique Mukasonga. And as you're reading this book, you'll get a road map, which is kind of your companion reader. So as you're reading the novel and you come across different names from history, different facts, different figures, you'll be able to flip open this road map and get some real world insights as to how true all of that is. So it pairs fact and fiction. So for example, there's this part in this novel where she mentions identity cards that for the first time made official the Hutu and the Tutsi ethnicities. This was under the Belgian colonial administration. So as you read that part, you'll be directed to flip open the roadmap to our next slide. Nope, next one. And you'll get to see one of those identity cards for yourself, what it looked like, and get a little bit more of a sense of how those identity cards played into codifying ethnicities that then led to inter-ethnic violence. So as you're reading along, you get your facts and information, and you still get to get swept away by the plot of a novel. And the boxes do more than that. They engage and connect fact to fiction, but they also sort of help you experience the country that you're reading about. So in this box, for example, there is a packet of coffee, this fine heirloom Arabica bean coffee from a company named Rwanda Bean Company. And interestingly, Rwanda has some of the best coffee in the world, but it also has this kind of vexed history with coffee because the Belgian colonial administration forced Rwandans to grow coffee, even sort of subsistence level farmers. And so they were not able to grow the food they needed, and they had to grow coffee for export. And those heirloom beans are still left over from that time and still provide us with some of the best coffee in the world. And this company, the Rwanda Bean Company, sort of flips that model on its head. It's run by a Rwandan, and it gives 50% of proceeds back to farmers. So in the box, you'll have a number of items that are ethically sourced so that you can learn about a place, experience some of it, and give back to it too through ethical sourcing. And so those boxes are available outside, as you might have seen, and you can check them out afterwards. We'll also have some samples of that coffee for you to take home tonight after the show. And now to delve deeper into some of those issues that I mentioned just briefly, we will have a panel featuring three really esteemed guests. We have Simone Monasabian, Jacqueline Murakatete, and Elizabeth King with us this evening. Here they are. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining this panel to discuss the past, present, and future of Rwanda. I'll just briefly introduce each one of these panelists so you have a sense of who we have with us. So directly to my right, we have Simone Monasabian. She is a relentless advocate for survivors of human trafficking and atrocity crimes. She currently heads the New York office of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Prior to her work with that office, Simone served as trial attorney for the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, trying genocide-related crimes. So we'll talk to her about that in a moment. On the far right here, my far right, we have Jacqueline Murakatete. She is an internationally recognized genocide survivor and human rights activist. She was born in Rwanda and was 9 years old when she lost her parents, all 6 siblings, and most of her extended family to the 1994 genocide. Jacqueline is the founder and president of the Genocide Survivors Foundation here in New York City, which supports and advocates for survivors. Elizabeth King, in the center here, is an associate professor of international education and politics at New York University and founding director of NYU's minor in peace and conflict studies. Her research focuses on war, peace, and development, as well as education in ethnically diverse and conflict-affected contexts, such as Rwanda. And of course, we have our author with us, Scholastique Mukasonga, but she'll be joining us via video. We sat down with her last month to ask her some of the questions, and her insights will sort of guide our discussion here. So I'll ask each of you after we hear a clip from Scholastique to kind of share some of your thoughts. But without further ado, I'd like to play our first clip from Scholastique.
Je me suis réfugiée au Burundi en 1973. On n'acceptait plus du tout les intellectuels Tutsis. On a chassé, même tué, les fonctionnaires Tutsis et les élèves et les étudiants. Après, je suis arrivée en France en 1992 et le génocide est arrivé en 1994. Et donc, mon devoir était d'être la mémoire de ma famille exterminée. Toute ma famille a été exterminée, 37 membres de la famille. Mon devoir de mémoire devait passer par l'écriture et c'est ainsi que je suis entrée dans l'écriture. Ce que je mets dans Notre-Dame et du Nil, je prête justement mon histoire à des personnages, ce qui me permettait de l'écrire vraiment sans souffrance, avec beaucoup de rigueur, avec beaucoup d'énergie, de force que je n'aurais jamais eu si je l'avais écrit en tant qu'autobiographie. J'ai trouvé une solution pour faire un roman, un vrai roman, un livre de fiction, mais c'est une histoire qui a été la plus douloureuse de ma vie que je ne pouvais pas écrire avec le jeu.
So the book, as she describes it, Our Lady of the Nile, is set in an all-girls boarding school that's meant to educate women to be the leaders of Rwanda. And through that school, she tells a story of mounting ethnic tension in the country. It's sort of an allegory for what's happening in the country. And she also talks a lot about the quota system, of which she was a recipient as a Tutsi student. So I wanted to ask, so we'll actually hear a clip a little bit, dealing a little bit more with that quota system now.
J'ai été déportée à Nyamata avec beaucoup de Tutsis en 1960. Au Rwanda, à partir de ces années 1960, on pratiquait le système de quotas pour les écoles. Il n'y avait que 10% de place pour les Tutsis, d'où ce que j'écris dans Notre-Dame du Nil. Et j'ai fait partie des 10% de Tutsis qui ont pu accéder à l'enseignement secondaire. Dès que j'ai mis les pieds au lycée Notre-Dame et des Citeaux, j'avais une mission, j'avais un devoir, je n'avais pas le droit d'être exclu de cette école. Je devais absolument, je ne c'était pas ma place, ce n'était pas Scholastique qui avait été admise dans ce lycée, c'est tous mes camarades qui étaient sûrement beaucoup plus méritants que moi, qui étaient plus intelligents, qui sont restés à Nyamata. Je devais absolument me donner tous les moyens pour avoir le savoir et apporter un jour ce savoir dans mon village à Nyamata. Donc, voilà ce qu'elle se représentait pour moi à l'école. C'était que j'étais absolument porteuse de l'espoir de ceux qui n'ont pas pu avoir cette chance d'accéder à l'enseignement. Tout ce que j'ai appris, je l'ai bien mis à l'école, à Notre-Dame et des Citeaux. Je l'ai appris dans les Water, dans les WC. Pourquoi dans les Water? Parce que c'était le seul endroit où la lumière restait allumée toute la nuit. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on n'avait pas le droit. Il n'y avait pas que le quota du nombre, il y avait le quota aussi des notes. On n'avait pas le droit d'avoir des notes en dessous de 70%. Et surtout pas en français et en religion. Donc, je me devais absolument je ne misais pas sur 70%, il fallait aller au-delà. Donc, je ne me faisais pas de cadeaux.
Okay, so we just heard a little bit about Scholastique's experiences in schools. And I know, Elizabeth, you've worked a lot on that topic with your book, From Classrooms to Conflict in Rwanda. So I just want to ask you how the quota system and in general the curricula of schools in Rwanda sort of led to this division in identities. And if you could also talk a little bit about the Belgian role in all of that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Thanks so much for having us all here this evening at this really incredible event that you've put together. So as you mentioned, my book is called From Classrooms to Conflict in Rwanda. And people often pause and say, oh, you mean from classrooms to peace? Because we wish and we hope and we act as if schools contribute necessarily to conflict. And yet what we see in so many parts of the world, including in Rwanda, is that schools in many ways help underlie conflict. And so, for instance, in Rwanda's schools, if we look at the structure of schools, there was this quota system to which has been alluded, where Tutsi students were to be granted between 9 and 15% of the seats in secondary school based on their proportion in the population. Or one can think in the colonial period how there was preferential schooling for Tutsi students who had more access to certain subjects or even to certain schools that were for Tutsi children of chiefs, for instance. So you see the privileged group changing over time in Rwanda, which is a theme that comes out in this book as well. But you also mentioned the content of schools. And so in this novel, we hear, for instance, about the Hamitic hypothesis that Tutsis were whites in black skin, descendants from Ethiopia, which was taught in the colonial period as a way to justify putting Tutsi into positions of privilege and power, and then was flipped on its head in the post-colonial period as a way to think about Tutsis as outsiders who had less entitlement to the country and who needed to be sent back to Ethiopia, for instance. So in my work, I look at the structure of education, I look at the content of education, and then another theme that comes up really strongly in this book is what we would call the hidden curriculum. So just this process of living in schools, of being in schools in that environment, day in, day out, where there was discrimination, which comes up so much in this novel. Two, going back to your question, really solidified Hutus and Tutsis as distinct ethnic groups. And we know diversity in itself is not necessarily a problem, and people coexist in many parts of the world, diversity peacefully. But what we see in this context was schools were part of dividing these groups as different, as all Hutus being the same, all Tutsis being the same, and really stigmatized ethnic groups in such a way that was part of, in my analysis, underlying of genocide eventually.
Yeah, and I want to ask Jacqueline about that because you must have experienced some of that growing up in Rwanda. So how did you kind of come to be aware of your ethnic identity and deal with some of these issues through school?
Yeah, just listening to Scholastique brought a lot of memories back because growing up, for example, I grew up knowing that both of my parents, my father and my mother, had not been allowed to go beyond elementary school education. Not because they did not have good grades, they were actually very, very smart, particularly my mother, I have to say, but that they had been denied high school education because of their ethnicity. So I was very well aware, even at a young age, that I lived in a country where, as a Tutsi child, I did not have the same privileges and opportunities, whether in education or in the workforce, as my Hutu classmates. And one of the things that my parents and a lot of Tutsi parents tried to do before the genocide was what Scholastique was talking about, to really emphasize that if we did, we were among the few Tutsis who got the opportunity to go to high school, and ideally even beyond that, like the importance of not taking that for granted. I had two of my mother's brothers had been fortunate to be among the few Tutsis who were given education. They became doctors, and I remember every time we got our grades, myself, my siblings, most of my cousins, they always emphasized the importance of working hard, because as a Tutsi child, we knew we had to be more than enough. We had to be great. The standard for us to be able to have the same opportunities was higher. But I was very well aware growing up that, again, as a Tutsi, I did not have the same privileges, and that made me and most of the Tutsi children, again, to work extra harder. But just going back to what you were talking about, really, I think that education has certainly had a significant role in leading to the genocide, because Hutu children were indoctrinated from a very young age. At any given time within a classroom, Tutsi children will be made to stand this side, Hutu children will stand here, and the teacher will go on in this anti-Tutsi narrative where she would tell the children that Tutsis were foreigners who had invaded Rwanda from Ethiopia. And so from a very young age, Hutu children were made to believe that their Tutsi classmates were not Rwandans who deserved the same opportunities, but that they were foreigners and they were invaders who could be killed at any time that the government wanted them to killed, as Scholastique talked about the previous killings of Tutsis prior to 1994.
Right, and there's the education that happens in classrooms, and there's the education of the public that happens largely through the media. And I know, Simone, you tried a case along those lines for the United Nations Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda after the genocide that dealt with radio and newspaper journalists who took their work from hate speech to really essentially being a weapon of war. So can you tell us a little bit about how that transition happened?
Well, under international law, hate speech is allowed, but incitement to violence is not allowed. And when does that line turn from hate speech, which is protected, to incitement to violence? And international law says you have to look at what is the purpose of the speech. You have to look at what is the context of the speech being uttered in, and you also have to look at the causation. What is the impact of it? And in Rwanda, it was very similar to anywhere else that there's been a genocide. Genocide is a three-part process. It always starts with hate speech. The second part of the process is always impunity and nothing being done about it, which encourages more killings, more dehumanization. And then after that, there's denial. And unfortunately, that denial goes on to this day. In 2012, the three accused who I was prosecuting, who received life sentences and sentences of 35 years, as well as a number of other genocidaires who were convicted, who never expressed remorse, who never sought reconciliation, apologized to those who they aggrieved, were given minimized sentences or were released because the international community or judges who were now looking at the releases felt that it wasn't as grave as they had thought. And so that minimization re-victimizes those who suffered. And so the genocide continues. And so I think what Jacqueline is doing and what Scholastique is doing is an act of remembrance, but is also more than that. It's an act of prevention. And what we saw in Rwanda that was very troubling, especially for somebody like me, who was a First Amendment absolutist, who believed in free speech, and who came from the United States, the one case I did not want to be involved in was this case of prosecuting media, prosecuting journalists. And I asked to be put on any other case. And eventually, when I was put on that case, I learned that things are not as clear as one might think they are. For example, in 1990, Kangura newspaper, which was the newspaper owner that I prosecuted, the owner was put in jail in 1990 because Amnesty International and the international community felt that restrictions that were imposed upon him were not fair. And so while that may have been the case in 1990, I think what the international community now learned from that is, while it is good to express the need for an open press, expressing the need for an open press does not only mean don't jail extremists. It means creating an open marketplace for all ideas, enabling voices of minorities, enabling voices of those who are most vulnerable, not just amplifying the voices of extremists by saying that their civil liberties are being denied. I believe in civil liberties. I believe in freedom of speech, but I think that what we saw in Rwanda, the consistent dehumanization of the Tutsi population, in the same way that Jews were dehumanized, look at their noses and break their noses, talking about how they're coming to get you, how have no mercy on the Tutsi, even distributing through the radio and through the newspaper the 10 commandments that all Rwandans were supposed to apply, which ended with commandment number 10, leave no mercy on the Tutsi.
Okay, wow. That's just so much to take in. But you mentioned, I mean, after all of that, there has to be sort of, or there has been somewhat of a coming together, an effort at reconciliation. I want to play another clip from Scholastique about her views on reconciliation, and then ask you all about your views about the progress that has been made in the aftermath of the genocide. So we'll have that clip.
La difficulté du génocide au Rwanda, c'est qu'au lendemain du génocide, le bourreau et la victime devaient encore vivre face à face. Donc, tout le monde s'est réveillé, donc les rescapés se sont rendus compte qu'ils ont été manipulés. Et dès que nous apprenons le génocide, moi par exemple en France, je n'ai jamais senti la haine et le dégoût. J'ai senti qu'il faut absolument immédiatement penser aux enfants, aux orphelins rescapés, à nos enfants qui étaient déjà là et à nos enfants à venir. Tout le monde s'est senti responsable de retrouver absolument un Rwanda où nos enfants pourront vivre autre chose. Il fallait éradiquer cette division, il fallait éradiquer cette haine, il fallait penser à nos enfants. C'est ça qui nous a sauvés au fait. Et, la chose qui nous intéressait, c'était absolument à réhabiliter notre identité commune rwandaise, qu'on a supprimé la carte d'identité ethnique, parce que s'il n'y avait pas eu cette carte d'identité ethnique, il n'y aurait jamais eu de génocide. Et c'est là où les tribunaux gachacha, les tribunaux traditionnels qui servaient autrefois dans le Rwanda d'avant le génocide, a dénoué les conflits de voisinage. On a utilisé ces tribunaux gachacha avec notre chance que nous parlions la même langue, le Kinyarwanda. Aujourd'hui, le Rwandais, de toute façon, n'a aucun projet. C'est construire le pays et il faut voir le développement du Rwanda aujourd'hui.
Yeah, so that's really powerful. Scholastique talking about sort of a really radical approach to reconciliation, radical forgiveness. And I wonder if we could talk about kind of maybe personally how you have felt in the aftermath, Jacqueline. And I would also like to ask Elizabeth to talk about kind of the countrywide program of reconciliation. So we'll start with Jacqueline.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, reconciliation is obviously a very difficult topic, I think, for survivors. Myself, as you said, I lost my entire family, my parents, all my 6 siblings, most of my extended family and friends. And as Scholastique mentioned, and as many of you are aware, post-genocide Rwanda really became a place, or is a place, where survivors have to live next door to people who killed their family, because during the genocide there was such a large participation from the Hutu civilian that at the end of the genocide, I always say, not only had over 1 million people been murdered, but Rwanda itself as a country was in ashes. There was no infrastructure. The lawyers, judges had either been killed or they had killed and fled. So the country had to start from ashes. And the new leadership was obviously faced with many challenges, including trying to bring the population together. Again, people who had been victims who were still living. Because right now, Rwanda is a place where survivors will go to church and will go to school, will go to a nearby well to draw water, and they will see somebody who killed their mother or their father, who raped their sister. And because, yes, we had the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which was tasked with trying to bring the masterminds of the genocide to justice. And we had the Gacaca trials, which dealt with ordinary civilians who participated in the genocide. But at the same time, the government realized that there was no way that everybody who had participated was going to be in jail. Mm-hmm. So it's been 25 years, as you all know. I think that the Rwandan government has done a great job in trying to move the country forward. Among the things that the government has done, as Scholastique mentioned, is remove the formal ethnic-based IDs, ID system, which was introduced by the Belgians and which identified Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa formally. So now in Rwanda, we no longer have those ID cards, which were certainly used within the education system and in the workforce to formally discriminate against Tutsis. And the Rwandan government has been trying to create this larger identity, as Scholastique says, of saying, yes, we are Hutus, we are Tutsis, and we are Twas, but we're also Rwandans. With the same language. Most of the people in Rwanda are Christians because of the Belgian influence. They were Catholics and Protestants and so forth. So same language, generally same religion, same culture. And, they've been a lot of progress. But I always say that it's important to realize, as I said, the genocide did not happen overnight. That's one of the things I always emphasize. It arose from years of anti-Tutsi propaganda, of this systematic discrimination against Tutsis, a culture of impunity where Tutsis had been repeatedly killed. It arose from the dehumanization campaign. So to think that in 25 years Rwanda will somehow be perfect and everybody's great and everybody has reconciled, I think that is not a true picture. So I think progress has been done, but there's still a lot of challenges because the ideology of genocide is also not something that dies easily. There are some people who still believe that what they did in 1994 was their civic duty, that killing Tutsis was their civic duties. Once in a while you read, papers of kids who grew up in Congo, children of genocidaires who talk about coming back to Rwanda and finishing the job. Or you hear about teachers who are being discovered teaching the same anti-Tutsi ideology. So challenges remain, progress have been made, but I think individually as survivors, I think that reconciliation or peaceful coexistence, as I like to call it, it's a process. But I think most of us realize that there is no other way forward because what we experience is not something that we want our children or grandchildren. And I think that's what pushes us to move towards that direction.
Right, and what would you add to that, Elizabeth, from kind of the big picture?
Sure. Well, so much to say, I think, in reaction to what you've said. And one thing I would certainly echo is just the enormity of this task, the enormity of the challenge. And if I think, for instance, as myself as an educator here at NYU, some of my students are here tonight, I remember one person who I met in Rwanda. I spent about 9 months in Rwanda conducting research, doing one-on-one interviews with Rwandans who had different experiences with the education system from the colonial period to the present. And I remember one in particular who told me that he quit teaching when his students tried to kill him.
Wow.
And so to think about the enormity of the reconciliation task, and just echoing what you're saying about 25 years being, in some ways a long time, and in some ways a very, very short time, if you think about this historical trajectory as well.
Yeah, and just to kind of flash forward into the future of looking at, we have so many conflicts around the world that are kind of brewing along ethnic lines with the Rohingya population in Myanmar, the Uyghurs in China. There's just a huge piece about that in the New York Times this weekend. And I just want to ask you, Simone, about the work of prevention, of kind of seeing the hate speech that you mentioned, seeing the curricula, seeing all this kind of come into action. What can be done?
Right. In 1994, what happened in Rwanda, which was the equivalent of 2 World Trade Center bombings every day for 100 days, was done in a very low-tech manner, right? By machete, by newspapers and radio stations. What we're dealing with today is the internet, and it's much more sophisticated. And I think that one of the things that look hopeful is that finally this year, the United Nations has come up with a global action plan to combat hate speech. It took many years, 25 years after the Rwandan genocide, for us to realize in the international community that this is something we have to take on head on. But I think that in addition to that, we also have to continue to amplify the voices of survivors. I think that our responses to how to move forward have to be informed by survivors like Jacqueline. I think that we underestimate how powerful it is for survivors to be able to tell their stories. I always knew it was important and the just thing to do, but this year on the 25th anniversary of the genocide, I started receiving a lot of emails from from witnesses who testified 25 years ago who I hadn't been in touch with, some of them for 10 or 20 years. And they told me that the chance to speak truth to power, to get on the stand and have a chance to talk about what happened to them and to their community. Remember, the people who masterminded this genocide were not just common criminals or like what we saw in Sierra Leone, people who weren't educated, who were high on drugs. These were professors, priests, lawyers, doctors, politicians who masterminded this genocide. And so I think that many of them are still around, many of them are still denying there was a genocide. And I think we have to amplify the voices not only of survivors, but of those Hutu moderates who took courageous stands. I look at how the Rwandan community always amplifies their voices and talks about that, and also talks about those who spoke out in the international community. Remember, in 1994, Rwanda was on the Security Council during the genocide. The genocidaire government of Rwanda sat on the Security Council. But there were other governments, a few who spoke out, 3 in particular, including Nigeria, who said, this government must be stopped, this genocide must be stopped. So remembering that there's always people who knew what was going on, there are always other choices. We could have jammed the radio station that was known as Radio Machete. When a radio station is known as Radio Machete and a newspaper is known as, as Newspaper Machete or Radio Ratwitsi, in Rwanda that means to burn, there's a problem there that we need to look at. Yeah. And so how we give aid in the international community, how we support tribunals, how we support the International Criminal Court. There are all so many things that we can do.
A lot there to think about. I have so many more questions to ask, but we want to open it up to the audience. If there's anything that you want to ask, you can make your way to one of the 2 microphones that are in the aisles, and the panel is open. Yes, one bold taker.
Hi. Thank you for being here. I just have a question. I actually recently visited Rwanda this past summer, and at a lot of the memorials and in a lot of the interactions we had with Rwandans, they call the genocide against the Tutsis. And so I was just wondering, I couldn't get a clear answer, so I'm wondering if you could all share, but is there a definitive reason or significance to calling it not just the Rwandan genocide, but calling it the genocide against the Tutsis?
Yeah, I think that's a critically important distinction. Unfortunately, I wish it should have been done earlier, because now we are trying to, it's been Rwandan genocide for 25 years. But, genocide by definition is targeting a specific group. So when you say, one of the things I always say, when you say Rwandan genocide, you're saying Rwandans were killed. People were targeted because they were Rwandans, and that was not the case in 1994. In fact, it was Rwandans killing Rwandans. So it wasn't foreigners who came and killed Rwandans. It was Hutus killing Tutsis. So the distinction is critical, because again, by definition, genocide is targeting an ethnic group or racial or religious group. So I think that this is something that survivors and the government and a lot of the activists are really trying to move away from this Rwandan genocide, because again, it's misleading and it's not accurate, because it was Rwandans killing Rwandans. So when you say Rwandan genocide, what does it mean? It's vague. But the genocide against Tutsi, you're saying the Tutsis were targeted for being Tutsis, unfortunately by fellow Rwandans. And it's also critical now because the final stage of genocide, as Simone mentioned, is denial. And unfortunately, 25 years after the genocide, we are now facing a growing movement of deniers who say that the genocide was not a genocide, it was a war, it was a civil war, or who say the genocide was not exactly what it was, who want to minimize the genocide. I mean, look how many years since the Holocaust happened, and we still have people who deny that the Holocaust happened. So denial is a final stage of the genocide, and I think that having clarity about what happened in Rwanda in 1994 is critically important to fighting denial and to genocide prevention.
In fact, what Jacqueline's saying is really important, because finally the UN General Assembly even passed a resolution saying that the appropriate phrase is the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. So I think that when the international community as a whole finally realizes that there's a need so many years later to refer to it that way, it is because there are those types of denial efforts that need to be addressed.
Yes, and again, my family was not killed because they were Rwandans. Right. They were killed because they were Tutsis. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that clarification be made.
Okay, can you make your way to a microphone, please? Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry, it's just our... We appreciate that.
First of all, thank you so much. It's just been fascinating and wonderful to hear everyone. Could anyone just comment a little bit about how you see things now in Rwanda? I mean, you hear things like, tremendous progress has been made. The memorials every year, things close down in April, and the genocide is discussed. Then you also hear, and I have no idea if this is accurate, but that, the distribution of power is still very heavily Tutsi and sometimes causes resentment, that the parliament and the Congress is overwhelmingly, is far majority Tutsi, while they're not nearly a majority of the population. And the same thing about the distribution of wealth, that most of the wealth is still in the hands of the Tutsi, and that these are, kind of reasons to be worried about the future and how things will, evolve. So I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. And I think this was part of the critical analysis from hearing a multiplicity of voices on the ground. And I think speaking both to the last question and this one, so absolutely part of the we are all Rwandan strategy, whereby people don't define themselves ethnically as Hutus or Tutsis or Twa, means that ethnicity is below the surface. And so we don't know exactly what percentage of people in different sectors or government would self-identify as Tutsi or Hutu were that to be allowed politically, right? So I think, there are a lot of questions. And I think if you do look at the evidence, there is a strong representation of Tutsis in the government, but not Tutsis writ large, because I think we have to also be careful about talking about all Tutsis as if they're all the same and all Hutus as if they're the same. So there's a strong representation of Tutsi returnees who had been part of the Rwandan Patriotic Front and living in Uganda, and Anglophone Tutsis within the government and within other powerful sectors in the country. And alongside this really important, and I don't think talking about the multiplicity and the challenges should or can take away from what my colleagues are saying here. What I heard from many Hutu respondents in my interviews was that they felt that they couldn't talk about their losses. And that with the dominant narrative being we are all Rwandan, being the story of reconciliation in the country, and legitimizing and listening to survivors' voices, which is so essential, there were also a really important part of the population who feels that they've been left out of that reconciliatory process and not able to talk about the losses that they've incurred, whether they were during the war or during the genocide or after. So it's this really complicated place, remembering that only 25 years have passed. And one of the things that this novel, I think, does so well is that it's both simple and it's so complicated. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is my experience of Rwanda, this complication and needing to seek nuance in trying to understand.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you to our audience members for such smart questions. And thank you all for sharing your insights and your experiences. It's so much appreciated. Before you all go, I just want to take one moment to recognize that this is an all-women panel, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, so thank you so much. And we'll, just want to introduce our next guest now. So, but thank you all so much for joining. You're all wonderful. So next we have a performance from Nisera Lewis. She is an actress who has played in who's part of this one-woman show, really incredible show called Miracle in Rwanda. The play is based on the experiences of Immaculée Ibagiza, who is a woman who survived the Rwandan genocide by hiding in a 3 by 5 foot bathroom with 7 other women and girls. So in this play, she plays several parts, from the people who are pounding on the door trying to kill her to the survivors who made their way out of there. So the story is one of faith and compassion against all odds, and we'll hear a little bit of that now from Nisera Lewis. Please welcome her to the stage.
When the killers were here yesterday, It felt as if their knives were already cutting into my body. I could feel it. I could feel the pain. And yet, they do not know we are here. I am safe. I did not know fear could make pain in my body like that. Physical pain. My father was right. I must pray. I must pray every moment of the day that I'm awake so that my mind is focused on God and not on these evil killers. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive. I cannot do it. I cannot say that I forgive them. They are evil. They are killing people. We can hear the screams outside, smell the burning flesh. Oh, if I had a gun, I would kill them all. If I had enough guns. Lord, I cannot lie to you. I will skip over that part. And forgive us our trespasses as we and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace.
Thank you. That was so powerful. We'll give you a moment to step out of that role for a second and welcome Alan Dewayne to the stage. He is the producer of that play, Miracle in Rwanda. So let's have a round of applause again for Sarah and for Alan. Okay, so Alan, we'll start with you. Can you just tell me a little bit about how this play came to be, how it came to be in New York City?
This play is the life story of Immaculée Ilibagiza, who, as you said, hid in a bathroom for 91 days during the genocide. My dear friend Leslie Lewis saw Immaculée speaking, and she said, this needs to be a play. Leslie's been the heart and soul of this Miracle in Rwanda. I've been fortunate enough to work with her for 10 years on this. We've taken this play all over the world. One place that it's been really well received was in South Africa, which we're going back into in 2020. A unique thing there is that that's the one place in the world where what they've said is that they both had to start over in 1994. Both countries were faced with making the decision to continue on with bloodshed and animosity, or to reach out and have forgiveness and reconciliation. And they both moved forward very well over these last 25 years.
Yeah, that's incredible. And Nasera, just a little bit about the play. You play so many different characters. What does it feel like? Well, first, can you describe some of the different characters that you play? And then what does it feel like to embody so many different roles in such a short moment of time?
Well, it was definitely challenging going into it, to say the least. And I think we realized that there's about 15 different characters in this play, all portrayed by one actor. So there's Immaculée Ilibagiza, who the whole story is told from her point of view. There's also Pastor Marinzi, who hides her and the other women in hiding.
And he's a Hutu, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was a Hutu, yes. Hutu with a good heart who wanted to help these women. And, you know, throughout the play, you hear the different voices of the women who are also in hiding, and that's even from the 7-year-old girl who was there. There's also, you know, the killers. There's different people that are portrayed all throughout the whole story. It was challenging, but, you know, the whole beginning of the rehearsal process helped with, you know, hammering in on the specificity on how to distinguish each person apart, which was very physically demanding, very vocally demanding, especially as a woman, and trying to get into my very deep register to be different people. But, you know, as those technicalities kind of got hammered in towards, you know, we eventually did get to a point where it's like, okay, we can kind of let those things go, and we're able to just tell the story from our hearts, from our minds. Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit earlier about how these divisions came to be, and we live in a moment in time where the word divisive comes up a lot, from the impeachment hearings to Brexit to just context all over the world. And I wonder what you hope this play will bring forward from viewers, and kind of what you've heard from viewers about what they've taken away from it.
Well, I wanted to touch a little bit on what Simone brought up earlier, the effect that the media had on this entire genocide. It didn't just start in '94. I did some research, and I discovered what was going on a couple of years before the genocide. They didn't have internet back then. They had AM radio. And what they had were right-wing extremists, Hutu right-wing extremists, spreading hate and division over the AM radio. What we have today, as I said, South Africa and Rwanda have come a long way in 25 years, but we as humans really haven't. Does that sound familiar? Right-wing extremists spreading love and hate, spreading lots of hate over the media. If we can just build that wall, our lives will be okay. If we can just get a machete and get rid of that other group, our lives will be okay. So we're really reliving some of that. I don't think Americans are going to get machetes and kill each other, but the hate and animosity here is as intense as it was in Rwanda pre-genocide. So I think we need to look at this story and learn from our past.
Yeah, and Nisera, what have you learned from kind of embodying all of those characters, from taking this role? How have you changed as a person, as a performer?
One of the biggest things I took away from this, because the story of Left to Tell, even though it is a story about the genocide against the Tutsi, it is, I feel like from Immaculate's perspective, she really wants to hone in on the message of forgiveness. And also, when you are in a place of hopelessness, turning to your faith, specifically turning to God in the context of this play. And for me, reading it for the second time, because I'd read it before when I was in high school, but reading for the second time and working on the play actually helped really restore my relationship and my faith with God, and helped me understand, and no matter how big or small your problems are, if you are in a place of hopelessness, just learning to stop looking inward and try to look outward to something, to another, a higher being. And since that was a very important message of her book, I made I made prayer and, my faith in God a more regular part of my life. And that was something I know she wanted people to take away from it, and it really did influence me.
Yeah, well, just the concept of forgiveness here is so powerful, as we heard Scholastique and Jacqueline talk about as well. But thank you for sharing your insights and your kind of interpretation of all of that. So thank you so much for joining us. That's it for our panel now. So I just wanted to have another moment of applause for these two, for Alan and Nisera. Alan, Nisera, and all of our other guests will be in the lobby afterwards if you want to speak with them. I'm sure this is just kind of the beginning of a conversation that should go on forward. But before we go, some of you may have signed up for our raffle outside. Yes? Okay, so we're just going to announce the winner of that raffle, which would be a 9-month subscription to the Alignist. And you can just, here we go. Okay. You
gotta shake them up more.
Shake them up more? Okay. Sorry to whoever's that was. All right. Oh my God, we have Nancy Brown. Wonderful. Okay. So you can find me afterwards and we'll get you signed up for a 9-month subscription. It'll come to you in the mail every 3 months. And so that box, the box featuring Rwanda with everything we talked about, the novel, the roadmap, the coffee, and a couple other goodies are outside for sale, as well as the smaller box, which is just the novel and the roadmap for those who are happy with just that. And so we also have some freebies to give away. So please stop by our table outside. And if you were moved by this event, if any part of it kind of spoke to you, please come to our next one on February 11th. It'll feature another big topic, another big issue, which is Afghanistan, 18 years after the start of the war there. So if you want to sign up for a subscription and get the box before the event so you can read up on everything, you can do that outside. But thank you again for coming out. Thank you for giving us your time and learning more about this really important issue. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.